I was standing on this balcony of my new apartment when my phone buzzed with a notification. The headline read, "Local woman exposes years of family abuse, brother arrested." My heart should have raced, but instead I felt nothing but a strange, peaceful calm. The article featured a blurred photo of the cramped apartment I used to call home, the same balcony where my stepbrother Ethan had pushed me off 2 months ago, leaving me with a broken arm and a shattered sense of safety. The same place where my mother Brenda had stood watching, calling it a joke while I writhed in pain on the concrete below. That moment, that fall, that betrayal had been the catalyst for everything that followed. But to understand how I ended up here, standing in my own place, with the sunrise painting the city gold, I need to take you back to where it all began. Before we dive into this story, if you are dealing with toxic family relationships or know someone who is, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps share these stories with others who need to hear them. Drop a comment below about your thoughts on setting boundaries with family. Now let me tell you how I went from being the family punching bag to reclaiming my entire life. The apartment on Morrison Street was dysfunction disguised as normal life. Thin walls, broken heating pipes that groaned like ghosts. I could hear Mrs. Chen's fights 2 doors down, and I knew she heard ours too. Nobody said anything. That was Morrison Street's unspoken rule. Our 2-bedroom was barely 1.5. Brenda had the master, Ethan took the second when my stepfather left, and I got a fold-out couch in the dining area. No actual dining table, just a cluttered counter and takeout containers. I turned 19 3 months before the balcony incident. Nobody remembered. In our house, only 2 dates mattered, the first when rent was due, and the 15th when Brenda's disability check arrived. Money that never covered the bills despite my $2,000 monthly contribution from 3 jobs. I started working at 15, lying about my age to stock shelves at the grocery store. Added Common Grounds, coffee shop at 16, then the bookstore on weekends. 40 to 50 hours a week through high school and after. College was impossible when every penny went to keeping us housed. Brenda made it sound reasonable. "You owe me," she would say. "I raised you, fed you, clothed you. Now it is your turn." I believed her until I realized most 19-year-olds were not bankrolling their unemployed parents. Brenda had not worked in 4 years, claiming a back injury from the call center. Funny how she could shop all afternoon or dance at clubs with her boyfriend of the month, but could not contribute a dime. "You need to work harder," she would tell me between bites of food I bought. "We are barely surviving here." Ethan was worse because he did not even pretend. 23, healthy, capable, but decided working was beneath him. "I am going to be a pro gamer," he would announce to anyone listening. A streamer, an influencer, any day now. His follower count had been stuck at 237 for 18 months. No tournament wins, no sponsors, nothing. But in his mind, success was imminent. Meanwhile, he lived off my paychecks. "The internet is too slow for streaming," he would complain. "Pay for an upgrade." He ate through groceries like locusts, then got angry when I asked him to save me something. Little sisters clean up after their brothers, he would laugh when I mentioned his dishes, his clothes, his energy drink cans everywhere. Except, I was not his little sister. Ethan was Brenda's son from her first marriage. I was something else entirely, something neither of them valued beyond my paycheck. Brenda told me my father died in a car accident when I was a baby. She married Ethan's father when I was 4. That marriage lasted 8 years until Richard left. I was 12, quiet, desperate for approval. He packed his bags one Sunday and told me quietly, "I am sorry, but I cannot do this anymore." After that, Brenda looked at me like I was the reason for every failure in her life. The apartment reflected our decay. Beige carpet turned mottled brown, a water stain on the ceiling. I had named Gerald mismatched thrift store furniture. The kitchen was worst with cracked linoleum, a grinding refrigerator, a broken stove burner. Good enough, Brenda always said. My corner was a fold-out couch behind a curtain, a bookshelf of dollar store paperbacks, a lamp with a broken shade. Getting ready in the bathroom meant Ethan banging on the door or barging in smirking. "Need to use the bathroom," he would lie. Or "Oops, did not know you were in here," while his eyes told a different story. The weeks before that night were especially bad. Ethan got rejected from a job and took it out on me. He started hiding my things. Uniforms disappeared, shoes ended up in trash keys, in the freezer phone charger cut in half. "You are so forgetful," he would say when I confronted him. "So disorganized. Probably just losing your own stuff." Brenda would nod. "You need to be more responsible, Ellie." But I would find my hairbrush in the refrigerator, my work shoes filled with shaving cream, and I knew. He wanted me fired so he could call me the useless one. Money got worse too. Brenda kept asking for extra. I need medication, she would say. Though I never saw pills. Doctor appointments with no paperwork. Ethan's networking opportunities that looked like new gaming equipment. I took extra shifts, worked doubles and triples. Came home so exhausted, I fell asleep in my work clothes. My body ached constantly, feet covered in blisters that never healed. I lost weight eating one meal a day, saving the better food for them. I stopped seeing high school friends. Too much work, too much shame. How could I explain I could not afford movies because I paid my mother's electric bill easier to fade away? Except my world was just work in that apartment. Common Grounds became my refuge. Owner Douglas Martinez was a kind man in his 60s, retired social worker. He treated employees with respect I had not experienced elsewhere. Fair pay, flexible schedules, zero tolerance for rude customers. His daughter Sarah worked there too, studying social work at community college. She had warm brown eyes and her father's kindness. She kept trying to befriend me despite my walls. Want to study together, she would ask. Coffee on our day off. I always declined. Too busy, too tired. But Sarah was persistent. She brought me pastries. Would be thrown out anyway, she would say. She covered my shifts when I struggled. Want the extra hours. She left notes in my locker with terrible puns that made me smile. Douglas noticed things. Bruises flinching at sudden movements, spacing out from exhaustion. He started scheduling me for shifts with free meals. Made too much soup again, he would say. Take the extras home so they do not go to waste. I knew what they were doing, but I was too tired and too hungry to refuse. The day of the incident started badly. 5 a.m. Ethan yelling through his gaming headset. I stared at Gerald the water stain, trying to summon energy for another day. Grocery store 6 to 2. Common Grounds 2:30 to 8. Bookstore closing shift until midnight. 18 hours of work ahead. I moved through my morning routine like a ghost, careful not to wake Brenda before 9. That was a cardinal sin, resulting in nastiness all day. The grocery store was brutal. Big shipment hours hauling boxes. Manager Rick was divorcing and took it out on us. Move faster or I will dock your pay, he snapped. I skipped lunch, had no food anyway. By Common Grounds, I was running on fumes. Sarah frowned with concern, but I waved her off. Douglas made me eat a sandwich at 5. Sit down and eat, Ellie. Not a request. The food helped enough to finish the shift. Bookstore was quiet at least. My coworker Jenny walked me partway home. So grateful you covered for me, she said, chatting about her daughter's soccer and weekend plans. I envied her casual talk of normal life. My reality was endless work, constant exhaustion, going home to a place that did not feel safe. It was 10:45 when I finally trudged up the stairs to our apartment, my arms loaded with grocery bags because we had run out of basics again, and I knew no one else would take care of it. I had spent my last $30 on milk, bread, eggs, and some cheap pasta food that would stretch for a few days if I was careful. My feet were throbbing, my shoulders were knots of tension, and all I wanted was to take a shower and sleep for a week. The sound hit me before I even opened the door. The television was blaring at full volume, some action movie with explosions and shouting. Ethan's gaming setup was even louder, his voice rising in angry shouts as he berated his teammates for their incompetence. The combination was physically painful, a wall of noise that made my head pound and my stomach turn. I took a deep breath, put on my blank expression, and unlocked the door. The apartment was worse than usual. It looked like a tornado had torn through it. Pizza boxes were stacked on every surface, some still containing congealed slices that had grown fuzzy with mold. Empty beer cans and soda bottles covered the coffee table and floor. The sink was piled so high with dishes that they were spilling over onto the counter. The trash can was overflowing, garbage scattered around it, like someone had tried to toss things in from across the room and missed repeatedly. Brenda was in her recliner, a new purchase that I did not remember discussing or agreeing to pay for wearing a bathrobe, despite the fact that it was almost 11 at night. She had a bowl of ice cream in her lap and was watching the television with the glazed expression of someone who had been sitting there for hours. She glanced at me when I came in, her expression souring immediately. "You are finally home," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "We have been waiting for you to bring groceries. We have not eaten all day." The lie was so blatant that I almost laughed. I could see the pizza boxes, could smell the stale beer, could practically count the calories of junk food that had been consumed while I was working myself to death. But I did not say anything. I had learned that arguing only made things worse. I set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, trying to find space among the clutter. Ethan paused his game long enough to pull his headset off one ear and turn to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from staring at screens all day or from smoking weed, I was not sure, but his expression was hostile and looking for a target. "Took you long enough," he said. "What were you doing having fun with your little work friends while we starved here?" I started unpacking the groceries, putting the milk in the refrigerator, which smelled sour and contained several items that had expired weeks ago. I need to clean this out, I thought, numbly, adding it to the endless mental list of chores that only I seemed to do. "I was working," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I have been at work since 6 this morning," Ethan snorted. "Oh, poor baby," he mocked in a high-pitched voice. "Poor Ellie has to work. You think you are so special because you have jobs. Let me tell you something, if you were actually good at anything, you would have one real job instead of 3 shitty ones." The words hit harder than they should have because part of me believed them. I was working 3 jobs and still barely scraping by. What did that say about me? What did it mean that I could not seem to get ahead, no matter how hard I tried? The self-doubt was toxic and familiar, and I pushed it down like I always did, focusing on the task of putting away groceries. That is when Brenda decided to chime in. "You know, Ethan has a point," she said, not even looking at me, her eyes still fixed on the television. "You are 19 years old, and what do you have to show for it? No college degree, no career, no boyfriend, nothing. You just work these dead-end jobs and expect us to be impressed. At your age, I was married with a child." The comparison was absurd on multiple levels, but I did not have the energy to break down all the ways it was unfair. I was busy paying for the roof over her head, the food in her mouth, the utilities that let her watch television and let Ethan play his games. But apparently that was not enough. It would never be enough. "I just want to take a shower and go to bed," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "I have to work in the morning." Ethan laughed a sharp, cruel sound. "Of course you do," he said, "running away to your precious jobs where you can pretend you are better than us. But you are not better, Ellie. You are just a workhorse, a dumb beast of burden." Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the 18-hour shift, maybe it was the cumulative weight of years of this treatment, but suddenly I could not keep quiet anymore. I turned to face them, my hands shaking with adrenaline and anger. "I am not a workhorse," I said, my voice rising. "I am a person. I am a person who is working 3 jobs to support this family because neither of you will lift a finger to help. I pay the rent, I pay the utilities, I buy the food, and all I get in return is criticism and insults." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the television seemed to quiet, though I knew that was just my perception narrowing to the expressions on their faces. Brenda had gone very still, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. Ethan had turned fully away from his gaming setup, his face darkening with rage. "What did you just say to me?" he said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I felt fear spike through my anger, but I had already started, and I could not seem to stop. "I said you do not contribute anything." I repeated, my voice shaking but determined. "You have not worked in 2 years, Ethan. 2 years. You sit on that couch all day playing games and eating food I paid for and living in an apartment I pay rent on. You do not get to call me names. You do not get to treat me like I am worthless when I am the only reason we have a place to live." Brenda slammed her ice cream bowl down on the side table, standing up from her recliner with more energy than I had seen from her in months. "How dare you," she hissed. "How dare you speak to your brother like that? He is going through a difficult time. He does not need you making it worse with your selfish attitude." "Selfish," I repeated, and I heard the hysterical edge in my own voice. "I am selfish for working 18 hours today. I am selfish for paying your bills. I am selfish for wanting basic respect in the home I am supporting. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" Ethan was on his feet now, and I saw him ball his hands into fists. The fear that had been simmering in my stomach suddenly boiled over into something close to panic. I had seen Ethan get physical before, punching walls, throwing controllers, shoving furniture, but he had never actually hit me. There had always been that line, that boundary he did not quite cross even at his worst. "You think you are so smart," he said, taking a step toward me. "You think you know everything just because you work some minimum wage jobs. Let me teach you something about respect. Let me show you your place in this family. He grabbed my arm before I could back away, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force. I tried to pull away, but he was stronger, angry, and reckless in a way that made my heart race with genuine terror. "Let me go," I said, trying to keep my voice firm, even though I was shaking. "Ethan, you are hurting me." He just smiled, a terrible expression that did not reach his eyes. "Good," he said. "Maybe you will remember this next time you think about talking back." He started dragging me toward the sliding glass door that led to our small balcony, and I realized with dawning horror what he intended to do. The balcony was barely 5 feet wide and 8 feet long, just enough space for 2 cheap plastic chairs that no one ever sat in. The railing was made of metal bars that had been painted over so many times the paint was chipping and peeling, revealing rust underneath. I knew that railing was not stable. We had complained to the landlord multiple times about it wobbling, but he kept saying he would get to it and never did. Ethan shoved the sliding door open with his free hand and hauled me out onto the balcony. I stumbled, my hip hitting the railing hard enough to send pain shooting through my side. "Stop it," I shouted, fear making my voice sharp. "This is not funny, Ethan. You need to stop." But he was not listening. His face was flushed with rage and something else, something that looked almost like pleasure at having this much control over someone else. "This is just a little test," he said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Let us see if you can fly, little bird." He pushed me again, and this time my back hit the railing hard. I felt it give slightly under my weight, heard the metal groan in protest. I grabbed onto the bars with both hands, my knuckles going white as I tried to brace myself. "Please," I begged, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Please stop, you are going to push me over." Ethan laughed, actually laughed at my fear. "Oh, come on," he said. "Where is that big mouth now? Where are all those smart comments about me not working? I thought you were so tough. I thought you were so independent. Prove it. Show me how strong you are." He pushed me again, harder this time, and I felt the railing shift backward. The metal was pulling away from the concrete of the building, the anchors that held it in place weakened by rust and neglect. "This is my house," Ethan shouted in my face. "My rules. You do not get to come in here and act like you are better than me. You are nothing. You are just a burden we have to put up with." I could see Brenda standing in the doorway, backlit by the living room lights, and for one desperate moment I thought she was going to intervene, going to tell Ethan to stop, going to protect me the way a mother should protect her child. But she just stood there, her arms crossed, watching with that cold, evaluating expression that told me she was not going to help. She was going to let this happen. Ethan shoved me one more time, and that was when the railing gave way completely. I felt the metal tear loose from its moorings, felt myself falling backward, with nothing to catch me, nothing to stop my momentum. Time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does during accidents. I saw Ethan's face above me, saw his expression shift from rage to surprise to something that might have been fear, but looked more like excitement. I saw Brenda's silhouette in the doorway, still not moving, still not helping. I tried to twist in midair, some instinct telling me to protect my head, to land on my feet, to do anything to minimize the damage. But I was falling from the second floor, and there was only so much I could do. I hit the concrete walkway below with a sickening crunch that I felt more than heard my right arm taking the full impact as I tried to break my fall. The pain was indescribable. It was white-hot and all-consuming, radiating from my arm through my entire body in waves that made my vision blur and my stomach heave. I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but lie there on the cold concrete while my nervous system screamed in protest. I tried to move my arm and realized with a distant sort of horror that it was not responding properly, that it was bent at an angle that arms should not bend, that something was very badly broken. I heard footsteps and managed to tilt my head up, expecting to see concerned neighbors, maybe someone calling for an ambulance. Instead, I saw Brenda walking toward me with all the urgency of someone approaching a mild annoyance. She was still in her bathrobe, her hair still in curlers, and her face was set in an expression of irritation rather than concern. "Ellie, for God's sake," she said, her voice sharp with exasperation. "Do you have to be so dramatic about everything? The neighbors are going to hear you." I tried to speak, to tell her that I could not feel my fingers, that I thought my arm was broken, that I needed help immediately. But all that came out was a choked whimper as another wave of pain crashed over me. I heard Ethan's voice from above, echoing down from the balcony. "Is she okay?" he called, and I could hear the laughter in his voice like this was all some great joke. Brenda looked up at him and actually smiled. "She is fine," she called back. "Just being her usual dramatic self. You know how she is." The casual dismissal of my pain. The complete lack of concern for what had just happened hit me almost as hard as the concrete had. I was lying there with what I was increasingly certain was a compound fracture, possibly with internal injuries, definitely in need of immediate medical attention, and my mother was calling me dramatic. "Get up," Brenda said, nudging my leg with her slipper. "You are going to catch cold lying on the ground like that. Come inside and stop making a scene." I could not believe what I was hearing. I literally could not process the words she was saying because they were so divorced from the reality of the situation. But I also knew with absolute certainty that she was not going to help me. She was going to stand there and watch me suffer and call it my own fault. With a monumental effort, I managed to roll onto my side, cradling my broken arm against my chest. The movement sent fresh spikes of agony through my entire body, and I had to fight not to vomit. Slowly, inch by inch, I got myself to my hands and knees, then to my feet. I swayed dangerously, my vision swimming with pain and shock, but I stayed upright through sheer force of will. "Hospital," I managed to gasp out. "I need to go to the hospital." Brenda rolled her eyes at me while I stood there barely conscious with my arm hanging at a grotesque angle. "We cannot afford the emergency room," she said, as if she was explaining something obvious to a child. "You do not have insurance that covers it. Just come inside and put some ice on it. You will be fine by morning." "But I am not fine now," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Brenda, I think my arm is broken. Look at it, please." She glanced at my arm with all the interest she might give to a mildly annoying stain on the carpet. "It is probably just sprained," she said. "You are always so quick to assume the worst. Come inside, take some ibuprofen, and stop being such a baby about it." Ethan had come down from the balcony and was standing next to his mother now, and together they looked at me with identical expressions of irritation and judgment. "This is going to be a great story," Ethan said, smirking. The time clumsy Ellie fell off the balcony like an idiot. Very graceful, really showcasing those motor skills. The reframing of what had happened, the blatant lie that I had fallen rather than been pushed, would have enraged me if I had any energy left for anger. But I was running on empty. My body going into shock, my mind struggling to process the dual trauma of the physical injury and the emotional betrayal. They were going to tell people I fell. They were going to make this my fault, my clumsiness, my failure to watch where I was going. I stumbled past them into the building, every step an agony, and somehow made it up the stairs to our apartment. I went straight to the bathroom, the only room with a lock, and I shut myself inside. The face that looked back at me from the mirror was pale and waxy, eyes huge and glassy with shock. My right arm was already swelling grotesquely, the skin turning purple and black before my eyes. When I tried to move my fingers, nothing happened. The signals from my brain were not getting through. I found some elastic bandages under the sink, the kind meant for sprains, and with my left hand, I tried to wrap my arm as best I could. Every touch sent fresh waves of nausea and pain rolling through me, but I persevered because I knew I was not going to get any other help. I fashioned a makeshift sling from a scarf, trying to immobilize the arm to prevent further damage, and I took 4 ibuprofen, even though I knew it was not going to touch this level of pain. Then I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, and I cried. Not the loud sobbing kind of crying that brings relief, but the quiet, desperate kind that comes when you have finally hit bottom and realize there is no one coming to pull you up. I cried for the pain in my arm, for the betrayal of my family, for the years I had wasted, trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I cried for the girl I had been, who thought if she just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, she would finally be valued. And then I stopped crying. I dried my face with a towel, looked at myself in the mirror, and I made a decision. They were never going to treat this as a joke again. They were never going to get away with calling me dramatic or clumsy or making this my fault. I was done being their victim. I was done accepting their version of reality. From this moment forward, I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. I pulled out my phone with my left hand, and I started researching. I looked up domestic abuse laws in our state. I looked up legal aid services. I looked up how to document injuries for potential future legal proceedings. I researched tenant rights and financial exploitation and parental alienation. I read articles in forum posts and legal advice columns until the sky outside the tiny bathroom window started to lighten with dawn. I did not sleep that night. I could not have slept with the pain in my arm anyway. But more than that, I was consumed with planning. I needed a strategy. I needed to be smart about this because if I just confronted them again or went to the police without evidence, it would be my word against theirs. and Brenda had always been good at playing the victim, at manipulating sympathy from outsiders. I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something that would make it impossible for them to talk their way out of consequences. When morning came, I forced myself to get up. My arm throbbed with a deep, persistent ache that made me feel nauseous, but I had a shift at Common Grounds in 2 hours, and I could not afford to lose my job. Not now, not when I was planning my escape. I put on my uniform one-handed, struggling with buttons and zippers, and I looked at my pale face in the mirror. You can do this, I told my reflection. You can survive this day. You have survived worse. The walk to Common Grounds normally took me 15 minutes, but that morning it took almost half an hour. Every step jarred my arm, sending fresh spikes of pain through my shoulder and down into my fingers. By the time I reached the coffee shop, I was sweating and pale, my breath coming in short gasps. I thought about turning around, going home, giving up. But home was not safe. Home was not an option anymore. So I pushed through the door and I started my shift. Douglas noticed immediately. He took one look at my face, at the way I was holding my arm, and his expression went from pleasant greeting to deep concern in seconds. Ellie, he said, coming around the counter, what happened? I opened my mouth to give him the lie. I had prepared the story about falling down the stairs that would be plausible enough that he would not ask too many questions. But something about the gentleness in his voice, the genuine worry in his eyes, made the lie stick in my throat. I fell, I said, which was technically true, even if it was missing the crucial detail that I had been pushed. I hurt my arm. Douglas reached out carefully, his experienced eyes taking in the swelling, the bruising, the unnatural angle. This needs to be looked at by a doctor immediately, he said firmly. This is serious, Ellie. You could have broken bones, nerve damage, all kinds of complications. I cannot afford the emergency room, I said quietly, hating how defeated I sounded. Douglas studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him processing information, putting together pieces of a puzzle I had not meant to show him. Then he did something that changed everything. He pulled out his wallet and handed me a stack of bills, at least $200. This is an advance on your paycheck, he said in a voice that did not allow for argument. You are going to the urgent care clinic on 5th Street right now. Tell them I sent you. They know me and they will work with you on payment. I started, but he cut me off. Yes, you can, he said. Ellie, you are one of the best employees I have ever had. You show up on time, you work hard, you are kind to every customer, even the difficult ones, and you never complain. I am not going to stand here and watch you suffer because you are too proud to accept help. Sarah will cover your shift. You are going to the clinic right now, and you are not coming back until you have been properly treated. Do I make myself clear? The tears came before I could stop them spilling down my cheeks in hot streams. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and I took the money from his hand. Douglas gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze with his free hand, careful to avoid my injured side. You deserve better than this, he said quietly. Whatever is happening in your life, you deserve better. Now go. Get yourself taken care of. The urgent care clinic was clean and efficient and slightly overwhelming after a sleepless night of pain. The doctor who examined me was a young woman named Dr. Patel, who had kind eyes and gentle hands. She took x-rays and confirmed what I already knew. My arm was broken in 2 places, a displaced fracture of the radius and ulna that was going to require a cast for at least 6 weeks. She also documented the bruising on my shoulders and hips, took photographs for their records, and gently suggested that the injury pattern was consistent with someone being pushed or falling from a height. I did not confirm anything, but I also did not deny it. I just took the copies of all the medical records she offered me, accepted the prescription for pain medication that I knew I could not afford to fill, and let the orthopedic technician fit me for a proper cast. The relief when my arm was finally immobilized correctly was immense, though the pain was still substantial. At least now I could think about something other than the constant throbbing. When I left the clinic 3 hours later, I had a bright blue cast from my hand to just below my elbow, a follow-up appointment card for 2 weeks from now, and a folder full of medical documentation that detailed every injury I had sustained. I also had a referral to a social worker that Dr. Patel had insisted on including, a phone number for a domestic violence hotline, and a list of resources for people in unsafe living situations. I walked back to Common Grounds, not because I intended to work, but because I did not know where else to go. Douglas was behind the counter when I came in, and his face softened when he saw the cast. Sarah was there too, taking orders from a customer, and she did a double take when she spotted me. The The moment her customer left, she came over and wrapped me in the kind of hug that made something crack open inside my chest. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I am so glad you got it taken care of. We were worried." The "we" in that sentence made me realize that they had been talking about me discussing my situation, probably figuring out that things were much worse than I had ever let on. Part of me wanted to be embarrassed, but mostly I just felt grateful that someone cared enough to worry. Douglas made me sit down at one of the tables and brought me a sandwich and a cup of soup. "Eat," he commanded, and I did, discovering that I was ravenous in that way. You get when your body has been running on empty for too long. While I ate, Sarah sat across from me, and slowly, haltingly, I started to tell them the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Enough about Ethan's escalating aggression, about Brenda's enabling about the balcony and the fall, and the refusal to take me to the hospital. Sarah's expression went from concerned to horrified to absolutely furious as I talked. She was studying social work, and she recognized the signs of abuse that I had been living with for so long that they seemed normal to me. Douglas was quieter, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. When I finished, there was a long moment of heavy silence. "You cannot go back there," Sarah said finally. "Ellie, you know you cannot go back there, right? This is not safe. This is not okay. This is serious abuse, and it is only going to get worse." I knew she was right. Deep in my bones, beneath all the denial and rationalization and misplaced sense of obligation, I knew that I was in danger. But knowing something and being ready to act on it are two different things. "Where would I go?" I asked, hearing how small my voice sounded. "I do not have any savings. I cannot afford first and last month's rent on a new place. All my money goes to supporting them." Sarah reached across the table and took my good hand. "You will figure it out," she said firmly. "But first we need to keep you safe. You can stay with me for now. My roommate just moved out, so I have an extra room. It is not much, but it is yours if you want it." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I could not quite process it. "You barely know me," I said. "Why would you do that?" Sarah squeezed my hand. "Because you are my friend," she said simply. "Because no one deserves to live in fear. Because I have the space and the ability to help, and it would be wrong not to offer. You do not have to decide right now. Just know that the option is there." I wanted to accept immediately. I wanted to run from that apartment and never look back. But I also knew that I could not just disappear. Brenda had my social security card, my birth certificate, all my important documents. I had belongings that I needed, things that mattered to me, even if they had no monetary value. And more than that, I had a growing desire, not just to escape, but to make them pay for what they had done. "I think I have an idea," I said slowly. "But I'm going to need help. I am going to need to gather evidence. I am going to need to document everything they have done. And then I am going to make sure the whole world knows what kind of people they really are." Sarah and Douglas exchanged glances, and then they both nodded. "We will help you," Douglas said. "Whatever you need, we will help you. Just tell us what to do." Over the next 2 weeks, I executed my plan with a precision that surprised me. I had always thought of myself as someone who avoided conflict, who kept her head down and tried not to make waves. But I discovered that I had a talent for strategic thinking when properly motivated. And my motivation was the white-hot anger that burned in my chest every time I looked at my cast, every time I remembered Ethan's hands pushing me, every time I recalled Brenda's cold dismissal of my pain. The first thing I did was buy a small voice-activated recorder from the discount electronics store, using some of the money Douglas had advanced me. I set it up in the common areas of the apartment, hidden in places where it would not be noticed. Behind the books on the shelf, tucked under the couch, wedged behind the television. I also started recording conversations on my phone whenever I was in the same room with Brenda or Ethan, keeping the device in my pocket with the voice memo app running. I needed proof of how they treated me, how they talked about me, what they really thought about the situation. I needed their cruelty captured in their own words, undeniable and damning. So I provoked them, subtly setting up situations that would make them reveal their true colors. I would leave food in the refrigerator with my name on it, and record Ethan's mocking laughter when he ate it anyway. I would ask Brenda about splitting the utility bills more fairly, and capture her angry rant about how I should be grateful for a roof over my head. The recordings were worse than I expected. When I listened back to them in the privacy of the bathroom with headphones on, I heard things that made my stomach turn. I heard Brenda on the phone with one of her friends complaining about what an ungrateful burden I was, how I never appreciated anything she did for me, how she wished my father had taken me with him when he left. That last part caught my attention. When he left. Not when he died. When he left. I heard Ethan bragging to his gaming friends about pushing me off the balcony, describing it as the funniest thing he had done in months, laughing about how I had gone flying like a cartoon character. His friends laughed too, none of them questioning whether what he had done was wrong or dangerous or illegal. They just egged him on, encouraging more stories of his terrible behavior. But the most devastating recording came about 3 weeks after the balcony incident. I was working a late shift at the bookstore, and the recorder in the living room captured a fight between Brenda and Ethan. They were arguing about money as usual, Ethan demanding more cash for some gaming equipment he wanted, and Brenda defending her decision to spend their limited funds on herself instead. The argument escalated quickly, both of them shouting, and in the heat of the moment, Brenda let slip something that made my blood run cold when I listened to the playback later that night. "You think you have it hard," she screamed at him. "Try raising a kid who is not even yours, who is just a constant reminder of the man who got away." Ellie's father was some rich guy who actually wanted her, who wanted to give her everything. But I made sure that never happened, because I was not going to let him make me look like the bad guy. The recording went on, Brenda's anger making her indiscreet. "I took Ellie and I left in the middle of the night," she said. "I changed my name, moved across state lines, made sure he could never find us. He was so desperate to be a father, so pathetic, and I used that against him. I kept his daughter just to hurt him, and every time I look at her, I remember how much power I have, how I won." Ethan's response was almost as bad. "So what?" he said. "She is useful, she pays the bills. Who cares about her rich daddy? We have it good here because of her. Just keep milking her for everything we can get, and maybe we will never have to work again." The casual cruelty of it, the admission that they had been deliberately exploiting me, the revelation that my entire life had been built on a lie. It all poured out in that one terrible conversation. I sat on my fold-out couch that night, headphones on, listening to the recording over and over. My father was alive. He had wanted me. He had tried to keep me. And Brenda had stolen me away out of spite, had lied to me for 19 years, had let me believe I was unwanted and alone, when the truth was that I had a father who had been searching for me all this time. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the rage. They had not just abused me in the present. They had stolen my past, stolen the relationship I should have had with my father, stolen an entire alternate life that I could have lived. And they had done it deliberately, maliciously, for no reason other than to hurt someone who had tried to love me. That recording became the centerpiece of my plan. But I knew I needed more than just audio evidence. I needed corroboration, documentation, proof that would stand up to scrutiny. Sarah had mentioned her volunteer work with the Legal Aid Office, and through her connections, she put me in touch with a private investigator named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was in his late 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of the worst parts of human nature. He worked primarily with family courts and legal aid organizations, taking on cases for reduced rates when he believed in the cause. When I met with him in his cramped office above a Vietnamese restaurant, I told him my story from beginning to end. I played him the recording of Brenda's confession. I showed him my medical records from the urgent care clinic. I gave him copies of bank statements showing that I had been paying virtually all the household expenses despite being the youngest and lowest earning member of the family. Marcus listened to everything without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "I can find your father," he said finally. "Based on what you have told me and what is in this recording, I would say your mother abducted you and has been hiding you for 19 years. That is a serious crime. It is also something that can be proven with public records, court filings, newspaper archives. Give me 2 weeks and I will have answers for you." He was true to his word. 10 days later, Marcus called and asked me to come back to his office. When I arrived, he had a thick folder waiting for me. Inside were photocopies of news articles, court documents, private investigator reports, and photographs. The story they told was heartbreaking. My father's name was Jonathan Reed, and he was not just some rich guy like Brenda had dismissively said. He was the founder of a successful tech startup, a man who had built a company from nothing and sold it for millions when I was 5 years old. He had met Brenda when they were both young before he had money or success, and they had dated seriously for about 2 years. When Brenda got pregnant with me, Jonathan had been thrilled according to the friends Marcus had tracked down and interviewed. He had proposed immediately, started looking at houses, talked constantly about becoming a father. But Brenda had been ambivalent at best. She did not want to be tied down, did not want the responsibility, But she also did not want to give up the financial security that Jonathan's growing success promised. She had left when I was 6 months old, disappearing in the middle of the night while Jonathan was on a business trip. She had taken me, cleaned out their joint bank account, and vanished. Jonathan had hired private investigators immediately, had filed for custody, had done everything legally possible to find his daughter. But Brenda had been smart. She had changed both our names, moved to a different state, stayed off the grid as much as possible. She had worked cash jobs for years, never established a permanent address, always stayed one step ahead of anyone looking for us. The folder contained reports from 5 different private investigators Jonathan had hired over the years. Each one had gotten close, but never quite close enough. Each one had been thwarted by Brenda's paranoia and her willingness to uproot our entire lives at the first hint of being found. The most recent report was only 3 months old. Jonathan had never stopped looking. In 19 years, he had never stopped searching for his daughter. There were also newspaper clippings from when Jonathan had sold his company, articles describing his philanthropy work, features about the foundation he had started that provided college scholarships to underprivileged students. In every interview, he mentioned his missing daughter, how he hoped one day to find her and bring her home. He had kept a bedroom for me in every house he had lived in, always hoping I would walk through the door. I cried when I read those articles, ugly, sobbing tears that I could not control. I had spent 19 years thinking I was unwanted, unloved, a burden that no one really wanted. And all along there had been a man who loved me desperately, who had never stopped looking for me, who had built a life with a space always kept open for the daughter he lost. Marcus arranged a meeting. He contacted Jonathan through the foundation and explained that he had information about his daughter. Jonathan flew in the next day, and we met at a coffee shop that was neutral territory, somewhere public where I would feel safe. I got there early, so nervous I thought I might throw up, and I sat at a corner table clutching a cup of tea I could not drink. When he walked in, I knew him immediately. He looked like me, or rather, I looked like him. I had his dark hair, his nose, his intense brown eyes. He was taller than I expected, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, and his face was drawn with anxiety as he scanned the shop. When his eyes landed on me, everything else fell away. He crossed the shop in long strides, and then stopped abruptly a few feet from my table, as if afraid to come closer, as if I might disappear if he moved too fast. "Ellie," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "My God, you look just like your grandmother. Can I—" He gestured at the chair across from me, hesitant and hopeful and terrified all at once. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. He sat down slowly, his hands trembling as he set them on the table. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, and I watched tears stream down his face without any apparent shame or embarrassment. "I am sorry," he said finally. "I am so sorry I did not find you sooner. I looked. God, I looked everywhere. I hired investigators, I checked every school database I could access. I put out media appeals, but she kept moving you, and I could never get there in time. It is not your fault," I heard myself say, my own voice thick with tears. "You did not know. She lied to me. She told me you were dead." Jonathan's face contorted with pain. "Of course she did," he said bitterly. "That is exactly what Brenda would do. Tell me, has she been good to you at least? Has she taken care of you properly?" I did not know how to answer that question without falling apart completely, so I just showed him my cast. I told him about the balcony, about Ethan, about Brenda's refusal to help, about the recordings I had made. I told him about the years of financial exploitation, the emotional abuse, the constant degradation. I told him everything, and with each revelation, I watched Jonathan's expression shift from hope to horror to a cold fury that was somehow comforting because it meant someone was finally angry on my behalf. When I finished, Jonathan was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "I would like to speak with my attorney," he said when someone answered. "I need to file for emergency custody and criminal charges, parental abduction, fraud, and child abuse. No, I am serious. I found her. I finally found my daughter." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal action and emotional upheaval. Jonathan hired a team of lawyers who descended on Brenda like a plague. They filed motions for all my legal documents to be turned over. They initiated criminal proceedings for parental abduction and fraud, and they served Brenda with a lawsuit for damages stemming from 19 years of denied parental rights. But that was not enough for me. I wanted more than just legal consequences. I wanted social consequences. I wanted everyone who had ever known Brenda and believed her lies to know the truth. I wanted Ethan's friends to know he was not just a harmless gamer, but an abuser who had hospitalized his sister and laughed about it. I wanted Brenda's church group, her co-workers, her social circle, everyone to see who she really was behind the mask. Sarah suggested I talk to Patricia Chen, an investigative journalist at the local television station, who specialized in family abuse stories. Sarah had seen her work through her social work program and thought she might be interested in my case. I was hesitant at first, worried about making my story so public, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that exposure was exactly what I needed. Abusers thrive in the shadows. Light was the best disinfectant. I met Patricia at a diner near the television station. She was in her mid-40s, sharply dressed with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I told her my story and played her the recordings. I showed her my medical records and the documentation Marcus had compiled. I explained about Jonathan and the 19 years of separation. When I finished, Patricia set down her pen and looked at me with a mixture of admiration and determination. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told," she said. "People think they know what abuse looks like. They think it is always obvious, always violent, always someone you can identify as a monster from across the room. But abuse is often subtle. It is manipulation, gaslighting, financial control. It is a mother who steals her daughter and then exploits that daughter for 2 decades while playing the victim. This needs to be exposed." Patricia and her team spent a week building the story. They interviewed Douglas and Sarah. They talked to my co-workers at the bookstore and the grocery store. They tracked down Ethan's history of petty crimes that Brenda had always paid to make disappear. They found former friends and neighbors who remembered how often Brenda moved, how secretive she was, how she never let me have friends over or participate in normal childhood activities. The pattern of control and manipulation went back years, and I was just the most recent and most complete victim. Before the story aired, I did one last thing. I went back to the apartment this time, with Marcus as my witness and my phone recording everything. I had not been back since moving into Sarah's spare room 2 weeks earlier. Brenda had been calling and texting nonstop, alternating between fury and manipulation. First, she threatened to report me missing. Then she begged me to come home. Then she promised things would be different. Then she cursed me for being an ungrateful child. I had not responded to any of it. When I walked in with my key, Brenda was in the living room and her face went through a rapid series of expressions. Relief, anger, confusion at seeing Marcus with me, and finally fear when she saw my phone recording. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why are you bringing strangers into our home?" "Our home," I repeated, and I was pleased to hear how calm my voice sounded. "This has never been my home, Brenda. This has been my prison, but not anymore." I played her the recording of her confession about my father. I watched her face go white as she heard her own words, heard herself admitting to abducting me, to deliberately keeping me from my father, to exploiting me for money, and using me as a weapon against someone who had tried to love me. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How dare you record me?" I did not owe her an explanation, but I gave her one anyway. I recorded everything I said, every cruel word, every dismissal, every moment of abuse. And tomorrow it all goes public. There is going to be a news segment about our family, Brenda, about what you did to me and what you did to my father. The whole city is going to know what kind of person you really are. Ethan had come out of his room during this exchange, and he was staring at me with a mixture of shock and rage. "You can't do this," he said, and I noticed his hands were clenched into fists. "You will make us look like monsters." I turned to face him calmly. "You are monsters," I said. "You pushed me off a balcony and laughed about it. You assaulted me and left me lying on the concrete. There is a police report now, Ethan. There are medical records. There are recordings of you bragging about it. You are going to jail." The color drained from his face. Brenda started crying, reaching for me with trembling hands. "Please," she said. "You are my daughter. You can't do this to me. Think about what this will do to our family." "But I am not your daughter," I said, stepping out of her reach. "My father is Jonathan Reed. You stole me from him. And there is no family here, Brenda. There never was. There was just you, using me, hurting me. And now there are going to be consequences." The segment aired on Thursday evening. Patricia had done an incredible job building a narrative that was both comprehensive and devastating. She included interviews with Douglas and Sarah, who spoke about how hard I worked and how concerning my injuries had been. She included Marcus explaining the 19-year search for a missing child. She included medical experts analyzing my injuries and explaining that they were consistent with being pushed, not with an accidental fall. And she included Jonathan. His interview was the emotional heart of the piece. He spoke about losing his daughter, about never giving up hope, about the bedroom he kept ready, and the birthdays he celebrated alone, with a cake for a child who was not there. He spoke about finally finding me and discovering that I had been suffering abuse for years while he frantically searched. He spoke about his determination to ensure that Brenda faced justice for what she had done. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Brenda's phone started ringing before the segment even ended. Her employer called to fire her before she could work another shift. Her friends, the ones who had always believed her version of events, sent messages ranging from confused to furious. The church she attended released a statement distancing themselves from her. Even some of her family members reached out to me through social media to apologize for not seeing what was happening and to offer their support. The legal consequences came swiftly. The police arrested Ethan the next morning on charges of assault and battery. He tried to claim it was an accident, that I had fallen on my own, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recording of him bragging about pushing me my medical records, the broken balcony railing that showed evidence of his fingerprints, it all painted a picture that no jury would find sympathetic. His public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was pushing for maximum sentencing given the severity of the assault and Ethan's complete lack of remorse. Brenda faced criminal charges for parental abduction fraud and child endangerment. Jonathan's legal team was also pursuing civil charges for the years of denied parental rights and the emotional damages from deliberately hiding his child. The case was complicated by the fact that so much time had passed and Brenda had been careful to stay off the grid, but there was enough evidence to move forward with prosecution. The financial fallout was severe. The landlord evicted them for the damage to the balcony and the risk to other tenants. The bank foreclosed on the car Brenda had been making payments on, and her credit was destroyed. She ended up moving in with a distant cousin in another state, fleeing the judgment and shame that followed her everywhere in our city. Meanwhile, my life transformed in ways I could not have imagined. Jonathan set me up in a proper apartment, a small one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with actual heat and working appliances and no water stains on the ceiling. It felt like a palace after years in that cramped apartment on Morrison Street. He made sure I had everything I needed: furniture and dishes and towels, and all the mundane necessities of life that I had never had in abundance. More importantly, he enrolled me in therapy with a psychologist who specialized in trauma and family abuse. Dr. Miller was a patient, kind woman who helped me unpack 19 years of manipulation and gaslighting. She helped me recognize the patterns of abuse, understand that none of it was my fault, and develop healthy coping mechanisms for the anger and grief that surfaced at unexpected times. The work was hard, sometimes excruciating, but it was also liberating in ways I had not anticipated. Jonathan and I spent hours talking, slowly building the relationship we should have had all along. He told me about his family, my grandparents who had died, still hoping to meet me someday. He showed me photo albums full of family gatherings I had missed, holidays celebrated without me, a whole history I should have been part of. He introduced me to aunts and uncles and cousins who welcomed me with open arms and hearts full of love. He helped me apply to college, and I was accepted to a prestigious university with a full academic scholarship. The admissions committee had been moved by my story, by my ability to maintain excellent grades while working 3 jobs and surviving abuse. They saw potential in me that I had not seen in myself, and they offered me a spot in their social work program. I wanted to help people like me, people stuck in situations they did not know how to escape. Douglas promoted me to assistant manager at Common Grounds and gave me a significant raise. He also cut back my hours so I could focus on preparing for college. Sarah remained one of my closest friends, someone I trusted completely, someone who had proven through actions, not words, that she cared about my well-being. Her apartment became a second home, a place where I could relax and feel safe and be myself without fear of judgment or punishment. The most profound healing came from understanding what family actually meant. For 19 years, I had been taught that family was obligation, that family was sacrifice without reciprocation, that family meant enduring mistreatment because that is what you owe the people who raised you. But Jonathan showed me a different definition. Family was support, mutual respect, genuine love. Family was wanting the best for each other, celebrating successes, and comforting through failures. Family was safety and acceptance and home. We established new traditions. Sunday brunch at Jonathan's house, where we would cook together and talk for hours. Monthly dinners with the extended family, where I slowly got to know these people who had been waiting to meet me. Birthday celebrations that were actually joyful instead of obligatory. Holidays that felt warm and happy instead of tense and threatening. I was learning what it meant to be part of a family that functioned properly, and the contrast to what I had experienced before was stark and heartbreaking and healing all at once. The trial for Ethan took place about 4 months after the balcony incident. I testified describing what had happened that night in clear, unemotional terms. I watched him squirm in his seat as the prosecutor played the recording of him bragging about pushing me. I saw his face fall when the medical expert explained that my injuries were inconsistent with an accidental fall. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, and while part of me wished it was longer, another part of me recognized that justice, imperfect as it was, had been served. Brenda's trial was still pending, complicated by jurisdictional issues and the amount of time that had passed. But even without a verdict, the social consequences had been severe. She had lost everything that mattered to her: her reputation, her community, her comfortable life of exploiting others. She reached out sometimes, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperately manipulative. I never responded. I had nothing left to say to her. The cast came off my arm 6 weeks after the incident, and by then the bones had healed straight and strong. I looked at my arm sometimes, at the thin scars that remained from the orthopedic work that had been required, and I thought about what those scars represented. Not weakness or victimhood, but survival and strength. They were proof that I had fallen and gotten back up, that I had been broken and healed, that I had faced the worst and come through the other side. Now standing on my own balcony in my own apartment that Jonathan had helped me furnish, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a peace I had never known was possible. The apartment was small, but it was mine, paid for with money I earned, and saved, decorated with things I chose because I liked them, not because they were cheap or convenient. I had plants on the balcony, real living things that I cared for, and that thrived under my attention. I had books on shelves and art on the walls, and a future that stretched out before me, full of possibility instead of dread. My phone buzzed and I looked down to see a message from Sarah asking if I wanted to meet for coffee before my afternoon class. I smiled and typed back a yes, feeling grateful for the simple joy of having a friend, a real friend who cared about me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I had another message from Jonathan, a photo of him setting up the guest room in his house for when I came to visit over winter break, with a caption that read, "Cannot wait to have you home." Home. The word meant something different now. It was not a place where I was tolerated or used or hurt. It was a place where I was loved, where I belonged, where I could rest and grow and become whoever I wanted to be. It was a feeling of safety and acceptance that I carried with me wherever I went. I had built that home for myself through courage and determination and a refusal to accept that the abuse I suffered was all I deserved. The story that Patricia Chen had told, my story, had resonated with thousands of people. I received messages from strangers sharing their own experiences with toxic family members, thanking me for speaking out, telling me that my courage had inspired them to set boundaries or leave abusive situations or seek help. I had not expected that, had not anticipated that my pain and my triumph could mean something to other people, could help them see that escape was possible, that healing was possible, that life could be beautiful on the other side of trauma. I thought about Brenda, sometimes wondered if she ever reflected on what she had done, if she ever felt genuine remorse for the years she had stolen from me and from Jonathan. I thought about Ethan in his jail cell, his gaming console, and his comfortable couch replaced with concrete and steel. I did not feel satisfaction exactly, but I felt justice. They had faced consequences for their actions, real consequences that they could not talk their way out of or blame on someone else. The world had seen them for what they were, and that mattered. But more than their punishment, what mattered was my freedom. I was free from their manipulation, free from their cruelty, free from the constant fear and exhaustion that had defined my existence for so long. I was free to dream and plan and build a life that reflected my values and my desires rather than their needs and their demands. That freedom was sweeter than any revenge, more satisfying than watching them fall, because it meant I had won. Not by destroying them, but by saving myself. I finished my coffee and got ready for the day ahead. I had a morning shift at the cafe where Douglas now treated me as a valued colleague rather than a desperate teenager willing to work for scraps. I had an afternoon class on social psychology that fascinated me and challenged me in ways I loved. I had dinner plans with Jonathan and Sarah, a family I had chosen and built for myself. My life was full in ways it had never been before, rich, with genuine connection and purpose and joy. As I locked my apartment door behind me and headed down to the street, I thought about that night on the balcony, the moment when everything could have ended very differently. If the fall had been from a higher floor, if I had hit my head instead of my arm, if Brenda had delayed getting me help even longer, I might not be here. But I was here and I was thriving, and that was its own form of victory. They had tried to break me, and I had refused to break. I had bent, yes, I had cracked, but I had not shattered. And in the process of healing those cracks, I had become stronger than I ever could have been without them. They wanted me to live in darkness and fear, in obedient silence. But I chose to live in light and freedom, in powerful truth. I chose to speak out, to fight back, to reclaim my life and my future. And that choice, that refusal to be defined by their abuse, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Not because it hurt them, though it did, but because it freed me. Because it gave me back the one thing they had tried so hard to take away: my sense of self, my dignity, my right to exist as a whole and valued human being. I walked down the sunny street toward the cafe, toward my job and my friends and my life, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, because it was not, but because everything was mine. My choices, my relationships, my future, all of it belonged to me now, and no one could take that away. I had learned the hardest possible way that family is not always the people you are born to. That love is not the same as obligation. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who claim to care about you but treat you like you are worthless. I had walked away, and I had built something beautiful from the ashes of that burned bridge. I had found my real family in Jonathan and Sarah and Douglas, in the community of people who had rallied around me and supported me through the hardest transition of my life. I had learned that I was stronger than I ever knew, more resilient, more capable, more deserving of good things than I had been taught to believe. And I had learned that speaking truth, even when it is painful and costly, is the only way to truly be free. The sun was bright overhead, the air was clean and fresh, and I was alive and whole and moving forward into a future I had claimed for myself. That was everything. That was enough. That was the victory that mattered, not their downfall, but my rise. I had been pushed off a balcony, and I had not just survived the fall, I had learned to fly. And now nothing could bring me down. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you but only knew how to hurt you? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself whole? What boundaries do you need to set in your own life to protect your well-being and your future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and building the life you deserve. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them most. Thank you for listening, and remember, you deserve better than people who make you feel small. You deserve to fly.